But what I would like to do now is to start looking at creating another graphics clip with a couple of shapes and then using those shapes as a way to manipulate the footage underneath them. So this is a great point to save. And let's go ahead and go forward. So we're going to move our playhead to 25 seconds and 29 frames. So I'm going to go ahead and click here and just say 25:29. Hit enter. It'll jump over there. And this should be on, it should be, I think it's like 1 frame in front of where we want to be. So I'm going to zoom way into the frame level. Oh, 2 frames. All right, so here's where we actually want to be, is 26:01. Okay, and so this is the starting of the footage of the eye with all these little hand-drawn lines radiating out from the eye, or maybe going into the eye. I'm not sure which direction they're supposed to go, but for me they always seem like they're, you know, there's energy flowing somewhere. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to do some false color on this. And so we're going to look at how to create some other shapes and make that happen. And so instead of using a rectangle, I'm going to go up and I'm going to go to the Ellipse Tool. And as soon as I use the Ellipse Tool, if I hover over the center of the eye, and I hold down Shift, then I should be able to get something that's reasonably round, or that gets pulled out. Now you'll notice right now it's like solid green. I went up, I grabbed my selection tool, and what I'm trying to do is scale this so it just covers the eye. And so I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger, right? The iris and pupil were a little bit out of scale. And so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change my fill color. You know, in the example that I showed, I did like a red. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that again. I'm going to hit OK. So I've got this red color here. Now I could go and just make the transparency of this whole graphics layer, you know, less. But what I'd really like to do is come over here to the full clip controls under Effect Controls. So if Effect Controls is not open, you can just click on that double arrow there and go to Effect Controls. And what I want to do is I want to change my blend mode. I want all of this color saturation. I don't want to lose any of that, but I want to see the footage behind it. And so we're just going to go ahead and I can't remember if I did multiply or color burn. Ooh, I think I did color burn. And if I didn't, I should have. But you can go through and check some of these options and see if there's one that you prefer. Obviously, it doesn't matter which we do in order to make this happen. I'm really happy with overlay. I really like the way that looks. It really helps with the painterly feel of the eye. So now I've got this graphic, this circle, and so let's go ahead and scale this out a little bit on the timeline. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and scroll forward and see if where this clip ends versus where the eye stops. Okay, so I need to go a little bit further, so I'm going to keep dragging on the timeline until the footage cuts away from this eye animation, which this is a pretty long eye animation. Now that you've seen this footage, you're gonna find all sorts of like music videos, and because it's open source and free footage, it gets used a lot. And so you'll start to see it pop up in other videos all over the internet. Okay, so it looks like I'm still 1 frame shy of where I need to be, so I'm going to scroll into the frame level, and I'm going to pull this out until I get the eye where it changes here to here. And I'm going to go ahead and pull this clip out to there. And so now right? This eye is red for this whole thing. So I've got this one, right, this one shape that's colored. So let's go ahead and create another shape, give it a different color, and see how it interacts with the different layers. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create another rectangle, and it's going to be a full frame rectangle. So I'm going to go ahead and I think I actually have to be within the frame, within the video frame to start this process. So I'm going to pull this out, and I'm going to again make it intentionally too large. I'm going to hit the letter V or click on here. I'm just going to drag this over a little bit so it's more centered. And you'll notice that in this case, it's actually created its own separate graphic layer. Now, the reason it did that is because I did not have this explicitly selected. So if I go ahead and undo that, if I was to click on this graphic layer that's already in existence and then create a rectangle and click and drag, you will see that that rectangle ends up getting applied to the same, right, as a new layer in that same graphic object. So it really depends on what you want to do. If I wanted this rectangle that I created to be blending like with a different blend mode and blend with both of the other graphics, with the graphics layer and this video layer, I could do that and have it be separate. In this case, I want it to be able to blend the same. I just want to change the color. And so I'm going to go ahead and make this more like a yellowish orange. And I don't know why I chose these colors. You could choose any color you want right now. Right? And so you'll see that when I do this, because this is overlaying everything, it's actually completely obscuring the red on the eye. So what I need to do is I need to take this rectangle and I just need to drag it down. Right, and so now I have this red eye with this, you know, this gold background for this section, right? And so now we could extract this little section and make GIFs and get millions of internet dollars, right? Because we've made a GIF of a red eye with a gold background, with arrows flying in, with points flying into the eye. Okay, so we've done that. Let's go ahead and move on. There's another clip that starts just almost immediately after this where this brain, and it's really short, but where this brain dissolves in on top of this woman's head before it goes to this creepy image of the eye over here, right? This is horror movie stuff over there, okay? So, but what we want to do is we want to color this brain, and that's a more complex shape, and so we need to use the pen tool to do that. And so I'm going to go ahead and zoom into the frame level, and I'm just going to scroll over on the timeline, and it looks like maybe I need to actually pull out a little bit so I can, and I want to get to a place where the brain is pretty visible, right? I'm going to end up extending this clip forward or backward, but right now it needs to be pretty visible. And so what I want to do is if I just start going and using the pen tool, when I have this video clip selected, right, if I go to the pen tool and I have this video clip selected, it's not going to do what I expect it to do, I don't think. Oh no, it actually created a graphic. Never mind. Awesome. That makes my life so much easier. So one of the things the pen tool could do is it could create a mask on the layer that was selected. But in this case, probably because we're in this graphics mode, it knows that we want to make graphics, and so it's not doing that. And so what we're going to do to start with is we're just going to click to create a point and just click to create a point. And you'll notice I'm cutting some of this off. We're going to go back and fix that in a second. But I'm just going to go ahead and go around the brain. And it doesn't have to be super perfect, but I'm just going to, and this edge of it just kind of disappears. I do want you to note there's this part that goes inside there. And so one of the issues right now is that I can't see what I'm doing. And so there's two things I could do. I could either change the blend mode over here to something like multiply, so I can actually see the footage below it, or I could just reduce the opacity in the Essential Graphics tab. I'm going to leave it with this multiply setting. I'm going to come up here, there, 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 and then maybe one more there. And then when I hover over the point that I started with, it'll close that shape. Now, right, I've created a whole bunch of these little points, and they have these hard angles. And in most places, in most places, that does not matter. I do want you to note, if you deselect your area here, like if you accidentally deselect this object, the selection tool will allow you to select it and you can move the whole group. But if you want to be able to manipulate the individual points, you just have to have it selected and then select the pen tool. And I'm actually going to zoom in here. I might go to fit so I have a little bit more resolution. And if you hold down the Option key or Alt key if you're on Windows, when you hover over a point, it lets you take that point and then you click and drag. It lets you take it from a hard corner to a curve. So if I do this and I click and drag, you'll see it's curving, but it's flipped on itself. So I just have to continue dragging and just rotate my mouse around like that. And right, if I wanted this to be cleaner all the way around, I could do that. You know, I did a reasonably good job, so I'm only going to make a couple of these curves where it's most apparent. Otherwise, you know, they seem to not be too big of a problem. The big thing is just making sure you pull the handles in the right direction when you do this. So if you wanted to round this out, you can. You know, it's oftentimes easier to quickly outline something with hard corners and then go back in and tweak the curves. It just depends on the shape. Okay, so let's say I'm happy with that. Instead of using multiply, there was another blend mode I used for this other section. Let me see. Yeah, so I used color burn for this one. It seemed to capture those nice little highlights and make the brain seem kind of wet and gross. So yeah, so let's go ahead and change this to color burn. Ooh, God, that's ugly. And then if you so desire, you can change the color from whatever this is, but I really like how ugly it is. So I think I'm going to leave it at this, like, I don't know if this is burnt sienna or what this color is that then creates these tones. So the other thing is, right, the brain doesn't just show up. It actually fades in. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and move my slider over until there is no brain visible on her forehead, which is at I think exactly 41 seconds is probably pretty good. And I'm going to go ahead and just grab this clip and I'm going to drag it over so the brain starts there. And I know that this is a pretty short amount of time that the brain is up before she disappears, and then it looks like makeup or something, like really poorly applied makeup. So somewhere in here is that frame, that last frame, and so I'm just going to roughly pull this over, and you'll see it's like, oh, you missed. So now I can go ahead and pull in and just see how many more frames. I think it was just one more frame was all I needed. Yep. Okay. So this is over the whole thing, but now, right, the issue is that the brain dissolves in, but this graphics layer just pops in. And so we're going to keyframe the opacity on this layer so it matches. So we're going to come over here and we're going to start where this is 0. And I'm going to lift this up so I can see this. And again, this line by default should be opacity. If I right click on this and go to show clip keyframes, opacity should have a little dot next to it, which means that it is actually this. And so I'm going to go ahead and actually it'll be a little easier to, well, I can just create a keyframe here. So I'm going to use the pen tool, which by the way is also the letter P on the keyboard is the quick key for that. I'm just going to hover here. I'm going to create a keyframe right next to the edge of the clip. It doesn't matter if it's perfectly at 0. I'm going to go in until the brain seems to be absolutely fully formed. I'm going to drop a keyframe again. and then I'm just going to pull this first keyframe, click on it, drag it down to 0. And so now, right, if I play this clip back, right, the graphic that I created fades in at the same rate that the brain fades in. And so now I can create this weird like overlaid color thing on here that matches with the video. I'm going to save this one more time, and we have one last section to do, I believe. Let me go all the way at the end. Yes. So the last thing I wanted to show you was how to import an image and use a still image as video footage. And that's really simple. So let me go ahead and actually figure out where this clip starts. Okay, so this is at 9:37:11. If I select that, I should be able to hit Command C to copy it, and then or Control C if you're in Windows. I should be able to come over here and say Control V to paste it, and then hit Enter, and I should jump right over to the iris. Now that I've done that, I can go down here, and I had you import the eye image already, so now you should just be able to drag this out and drop it on your timeline, and you're going to want to put it on video too. Now, anytime you import an image, I think it makes it, I can't remember if it's 5 seconds long or what the length is, but there's just this default length. And like any other piece of footage, if you hit the letter V or use this tool, you can click and drag to make it longer or shorter. Right? And so you can see, this is going to need to be stretched out a good ways to cover all of the things happening in the eye. And so the other thing is that right now this eye is much too small. And we don't want any of this other background. We just want the iris and the pupil, right? So that's all we want. So what we're going to do is, in order to mask video or to only use a certain portion of a video, you need to go over to your effect controls for that clip. So I want to make sure that I have my eye JPEG clip selected. And I need to come over here, and under opacity, there are these options to create an ellipse mask, create a 4-point mask, or free draw a Bezier mask, right, which is the pen tool. We are going to create an ellipse. As soon as I do that, you'll notice that the outline for the image disappears, and the only thing that's left is this ellipse. And it doesn't seem to fit or line up very well with where I want it to be. And so what I need to do is, if I hover over the middle, I get this hand, and I can move my mask around the image. Right, so I can move and see what's visible and what's not. So I know that I want it to be here, but I also need some other changes to happen. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this one dot here to pull this edge out. I'm going to go out about as far as I can. The same here. And actually what I want to do is, we'll talk about this in a second, we're going to hopefully zoom in. We're going to scale this whole thing up. So this is pretty good for now. Now, what I really need to do is I need to scale the eye and I need to move the eye. And so to do that, I'm going to go ahead and click on next to the word, or on the word motion, in the frame, or in the effects, right? And this is going to allow me to move the entire video layer. Well, in this case, image layer. Right, so I want to pull this up a bit, and I definitely want to scale this. I want to scale it until it more or less covers the edge. And you'll notice that this edge is really soft on the layer that we're working on, right? And that's because the mask by default has a pretty strong what's called feather. And feathering is just when you do a soft transition from opacity to transparency. So now that I've done that, in order to select the mask that I've already created and not create another mask, I don't click on these tools again. I select the name of the mask, which is right here. So under opacity, there's this mask 1. And you'll see we can actually keyframe and animate paths. We're not going to worry about that right now. We're going to do more of that in After Effects, and then those concepts do transfer back. And you'll see we have mask feather, mask opacity, and mask expansion. And all of those settings, except maybe mask opacity, are available here as handles. So first there's this handle out here. This controls the feather, right? And so if I pull this out, the feathering is much, more gradual. If I pull this in, the feathering is much tighter. And so what I want to do is I want this feather to be pretty minimal. The other thing is this handle basically just rotates where your control is. And then this handle controls the mask expansion, which basically means, where should that boundary of, where should the transition between opaque and transparent happen? Should it be inside the boundary or should it be, outside the boundary? And in this case, you can just expand it really large. We're gonna want it to be basically right where it is, and we can if we pull this thing onto the other side, we can actually shrink that expansion a little bit, which is what we want to do. Right now, if you have a little bit of a lip or things on there, that's no big deal. You can always just take your mask and reform it a little bit to make it to hide some of the skin that would be around the outside of this eye. And then if you needed to, we could always scale it a little bit, but I'm going to leave it set like that. And now that I've done that, I just need to change the blend mode. Now I could also obviously change the opacity if I was interested in having things overlay that way. But I'm going to double check what I used as the blend mode on this clip. I just did overlay. I went through a bunch while I was testing it, and overlay just seemed to be the creepiest. Right, so now I have this eye overlaid on an eye, and as I run through this, as I scrub through this, you can see that it appears like, because this is black, it appears like that color is only on this blue part of the eye, which is really kind of beautiful, kind of creepy. Right, and so we can see that we actually have more eye that needs to be done. So let's go ahead and just keep going until the eye disappears. That iris opens and closes and opens and closes, and we're going to leave it set here even when it's talking about the muscle structure, and there's about where it needs to change. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this side all the way out, and then it looks like I missed a frame or two, so I'm just going to come in so I can keep going until I find that first new frame that's different, and I just want to pull this up to that edge. And there we go. We now have this eye overlay happening as well. And so we've created this falsely colored eye with this black and white footage. And that's really cool. Okay, and so this is like sort of the primer on how to use graphics, stills, and text in Premiere. Again, if you're interested in animating text, you can either animate the whole layer, position, scale, rotation, or you can go in and you can animate those other things, but we're not going to cover that right now. Awesome. I'll see you soon.